All right. Good afternoon, Grant. I'm already taping, so let's just get started. Sorry this morning for all of you that I forgot to send out the Teams link. I did send it out later, as you can see. This is day 35 of our class today, and as much time as we need to tomorrow, we're going to do two things. We're going to go over chapter 11, which is on how to validate data, and we're going to go over program 11.1. All right, which is some kind of an employee thing. We'll go over that. If we get done a little bit early, if we do get done a little bit early, I'm just going to end class then. I don't think that that'll happen, but we'll see. All right. And I want to lecture today and at least get a good start on writing the code. We'll finish that tomorrow. Then on Wednesday and Thursday, we'll go over chapter 12, which is on how to use EF Core. The good news for everybody, I can make the announcement right now. I'm not planning on having any more hands-on tests. So the last one that you did, and hopefully most, if not everybody, got it turned in already. Hot number 4 will be the last hot. All right. Next week, if you care, next week, we will be going over chapter 13, where they actually have you build a site from scratch. I'm going to change the database that they're using. I've already created my own, and we'll send it to you next week. And we're going to go over that, and that will be the first time that we will add ourselves authentication and authorization. If we can finish that by next week, and I think that's totally possible, then the following week, rather than going into chapter 13, which we will do, we're going to start on our project. Now, I mentioned this before. I have written up nothing on this, but I'm going to say it right now anyway. All right, that within 2 weeks from today, I'd like you to have an idea. We're going to create a very simplistic electronic commerce or e-commerce store. And I'd like you to figure out what it is you're going to sell. All right. I am going to sell, mine will be a sporting goods store. And in particular, I'm going to sell different types of balls, basketballs, baseballs, footballs, etc. So I'd like you to figure out something else that you'd like to sell. Then what I'm going to ask that you do, and again, I'll write all this down as soon as I get the time. And what I'm going to ask you to do is to go out and figure out some categories from whatever it is you want to sell, and then start making, getting some pictures. And I'll want you to have both a bigger picture and a thumbnail type of picture. We'll go over all of this stuff. You don't have to worry about it. But I just want you to know kind of where we stand right now. All right. And I'm not going to make the work for chapters 10, 11, and 12 due till 2 weeks from yesterday. So you should have plenty of time to work on everything. Okay. The other thing I'm going to do here that's going to be a little bit different. I was talking to one of my contemporaries who actually teaches in another area. And I said, sometimes I have my doubts as to whether everything I say is getting through to everybody or not. With some people, I think, yeah, you're getting it. With other people, I'm not sure. That's no rip on anybody. I'm just saying, literally, I'm not sure. So what I've decided to do for the last chapters that we go through in the book is I'm going to basically use the PowerPoints as my guide and go into the book as necessary. I don't like to read PowerPoints, and I'm not going to read these to you. But sometimes I was looking at the ones for chapter 11 yesterday, and it appears to me that sometimes they give examples in here that they don't give in the book. And I think some of these examples are better. That is my rationale for doing this, just so you know. All right, so with that said, I'm going to just start it here from the Again, chapter 11 is on how to validate data. All right. Again, I don't want to read. You already have done a lot of work with data validation. Now, some of the work that's in here in this chapter will be repetitious. In other words, it'll be stuff you've already learned how to do. You know what? Repetition can be a very good thing. And in this case, I think it is. But they're also going to show you other validation techniques and methods that we have not yet talked about. All right. And as I am sitting there creating this project for us to all work on, all right, what's going to happen is when, in a couple weeks from now, hopefully, when we start on this, you're going to code along with me. But rather than using my pictures, etc., and you can do that. I'll give you my pictures. You can code the whole thing as though we're doing it all together and it's all going to be on this sporting goods store. But you'll eventually have to change it to your stuff. Then what I'm going to go and do, we'll get this working, and I don't have any doubt that we will. But I'm going to ask you to go back, and I'm going to have to go look through the book, starting with chapter 1 and going through at that time, chapter 12, and say, okay, we didn't do this. I want you to add that. We didn't do this. I want you to add that. And that will force you to go back and look at the book. Now, right now, my plan is this last project will be worth approximately 350 points. So 3.5 tests. So it'll be pretty important. And I'll give you the breakdown. I'll do all that stuff in a couple weeks. All right. So again, we've talked about some of this already. Some of it will be new. Some of it will not be new. All right. One of the things that we've looked at, but we really haven't used a whole heck of a lot, and that has been client-side data validation. You may or may not realize it, but all the work that we've been doing, all right, putting the stuff in our models, etc., that's server-side data validation. But now we'll talk about client side. You've seen it already because we have our scripts in there, query, etc. And I'm going to ask you later on to do some client side validation. All right. So again, you can read all this stuff that's in here. You can see it on the screen. Model state number 7, not new. All right. We check model state to see whether or not it's valid. So like I said, much of the material in here will not be brand new. All right. So if we looked at this, this would be just a very simplistic little movie class that had become a movie table. And you'll notice there's only 2 fields in it. All right. We've got a name field and we've got a rating field. So you can look at that. And the first thing that should come to mind is we don't have a primary key. Well, you may or may not realize it, but let's assume we don't want a primary key that's going to be an int that's going to be called movie ID. Let's assume for a second that it is not possible for 2 movies to have the same name. All right. Then if we wanted to take this field right here and make this field our primary key, we could do it, but we would have to decorate it by up above, we put in a new line right here, and then we would put inside of brackets, not curly braces, but brackets, the word key with a capital K and a little EY. So that is a way that you can take a field that doesn't have ID in it, all right, and make it your primary key. Usually, typically, what Entity Framework expects is your primary key will be the same name as your class name with ID on the end. So it would expect right here that we would have a primary key named movie ID, where the ID could be all lowercase, all uppercase, or mixed case. Typically, when I do it, I never do it all lowercase. I either use a capital I and a lowercase d, or both a capital I and a capital D. And again, you've heard me say this kind of thing before. All I'm asking is when you do this, be consistent with the way you do it. All right. So again, we could make name a primary key if we wanted to, in this case, by doing what I just mentioned. You would not want to make rating, of course, a primary key. That would be very ludicrous, to be honest with you. That would say that no two movies could have the same rating. So you wouldn't want to do that. All right. So a strongly typed view that posts a movie object to an action method. Well, what does that mean? Well, when we take a look at this, the strongly typed starts with the at model up above. All right. And you notice with that at model that what comes below it before our form is the validation summary. And they are doing it on every field that we have. All right. That can be problematic. We've looked at that before. In lieu of doing that, if you don't want to, so in lieu of doing that, all right, what you can do is you can take each field that you want to, need to, have to validate and put the equivalent of this in there, but as a span just for that field. Now, sometimes you will want to do that. Sometimes it won't matter which way you do it. All right. Also, you'll notice if you look in here that we are using under our inputs, all right, we are using the ASP4. That is basically doing the typing, and it's saying, hey, this field that we're putting in right here is going to be that field in a table. And this one will be that field in a table. Those are the two fields that we have. All right. You'll also notice if you look, we're not using the ASP-4 in our label. You don't have to. I think it's a good practice to do it, but they're not doing it here. They're just showing you that you can put the ASP-4 just in the field itself. All right. Also, you'll notice as far as what's in there, okay, what do we have here? Well, we don't even have type equal text. All right. Okay. An action method that receives a movie object from the view. Well, again, this is stuff that hopefully at least makes sense to you. This says, in other words, we've got an ad here. Notice it's a post. What that means is we should have a corresponding HTTP GET that's an ad. That GET would provide a new form, all right? And that new form would have these two fields in it, right? And then you would pass those on to your post. So this would already hold a movie name and a movie rating, all right? So as they say right there, the if model state dot is valid. The is valid is probably either the most important method that we talk about in this class, or at least it's in the group photo, let's say, because this is your conduit between what you have on your screen and what you're attempting to put into the database. So you better make sure that you validated that stuff, because either what that can do is either A, if it's invalid, it can cause your program to crash, all right? Or B, if it's maybe, if you're not checking it the way you should, you might let data in that really shouldn't be let in. And what do I mean? Well, I'm sure that if we tried to sit there and write an application, that it would not be with, outside of the realm of possibility that we could have a movie title that had a word in it that is not considered appropriate for people to look at, say, etc. All right, so let's use the F word, for example. I'm not going to say it, but you might want to change if you had a movie title with that word in it. You might want to change it to something else. You might want to do a replace where you put a bunch of like an exclamation point or a whatever in there. All right. So you want to make sure what I'm saying is there's a lot of things to check to make sure that your model state is valid. And as they say right there, if it is valid, meaning if it passes the test, all right, we want to add the code to, as it says, to add the movie. And then we want to do a return with a redirect to action, which is going to get us right back to our list of movies, because that should show us with our new movie have been added. If for some reason the model state valid fails, all right, then it should return us to our view that has the movie in it. That's important because in this case, it's not a big thing. We only have 2 fields. But what if we had, name, address, city, state, zip? What if we had a dozen fields and only one of them was in error? We would want to return them so they would have their all 12 or whatever of their fields filled in, so they could just fix the one or the ones that are in error, but the one or the ones that are okay, you'd just be able to leave them alone. All right. So again, that's the kind of thing that we're talking about in this chapter. All right. Now, they mention this, you may or may not know this. It says how it looks in the browser when the rating can't be cast to an int. So in this case, they're assuming you put a non-numeric value into the rating field. All right. Now you've got your choice. You know this, that you've got your choice, that if you want, you can put in your own error message when you do things like required or things like range, etc. You can put in your own message, or you can leave it out. If you leave out an error message, you typically will get something like this. Not only that, even if you put in no error checking range field. All right. So if we go back to this and we put no error checking in here, let's assume this is it. We put key up here and this is everything. All right. So we put in nothing for the rating. What this slide is saying is that what will happen by default will be the system itself will put that in. It is attempting to convert the number 4 to an integer. It cannot do that. So it gives you this message. All right. Even if it could convert it, it cannot. But even if it could convert it, it would convert it to the number 0 because FOUR has no arithmetic value to it. So it still would fail. All right. But you'd get probably a little different error message. All I'm saying here is typically you put in all the validation you want. But if you forget to put in some or decide, the system will do a certain minimal amount of validation for you. All right. And the other big takeaway from this is, again, typically you're going to want to put in your own error message. So you've got some control, there's some standardization as far as how these error messages look. All right, because you can have your own format, please enter followed by the field name or something like that. This message would be considered at least somewhat terse. If we checked it ourselves, we could change it to say something like illegal value entered. Rating must be numeric between 1 and 5, which I think at least is much more specific than the kind of terse message you get here. All right. So common data attributes for validation. We have looked at some of these. We have not looked at all of these. The required one is the one we've used most often. All right. We have used range, and when we've used the range, to my knowledge at least, it has always been a numeric type of thing that we've done with range. Something similar to what they just showed with like a rating that must be 1 to 5 or something like that. All right. You can also have a range where you use different types. Okay. So maybe, for example, you want it, this is a terrible example, but it's the one I'm going to give you. All right. We could come in here and say something in here like, um, let's say we were checking for whatever reason. Like I said, it's a dumb example, but it popped into my head anyway. A middle initial, all right, could be an N varchar with A as the min and Z as the max. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but just so you know. Then there's string length. This is not a great one. This is basically how many characters can you type in. So if we set a string length for first name and we made it, let's say, 25, there's nothing that precludes you from not putting anything in there. All that string length says is that it must be no more than 25 characters. In fact, if you're manually entering stuff in there and you try to type, when you get to 25, you won't be able to type anymore. All right. But there is nothing in there about a minimum. So you could use this as an example. You could say, well, why don't I just use a range and give it a min and a max? All right. Quite often, I think that's better than using string length. For instance, if I've got a field that's called state, I might want to set the minimum to 2 and the maximum to 2, something like that. All right. Whereas if I made the string length 2, it could be 0, 1, or 2. All right. That's your takeaway right there. The regular expressions, this never seems to end. We did regular expressions. We did them in the AWD1000 class. We did regular expressions in the AWD1100 class. My guess is those of you who have already done the AWD11 database-driven web development 1 class, you did some work in there with regular expressions, and you can here as well. All right. Now, I was playing around this weekend, just so you see this. All right. And I've already given you this before, but what is it, Reg? The one that I tend to use, of course, it wouldn't find it. All right. There's a regular expression.info. Maybe that's it. Regular expression.info. And for whatever reason, it isn't shown. There it is. That's the one I choose. I tend to use because, again, it has different languages. So if I wanted something with, I don't even know if C# is in here, but I'm sure I could find pretty much what I was looking for. There's other ones. Another good one is, I think it's regexp101.com. And it might just be regex. I don't remember. I haven't used that one in a while. But what you can do there is you can build your own regular expressions. And in there as well, you can come in and you can check out the language and whatever to see if stuff works. Now, we're not going to really do much of any work in this class on regular expressions. All right. But it's not that they don't have their place. All right. I have found that people that I have worked with in the past, and I'm not just saying this, but people who are very good with regular expressions, by and large, they're always going to have a job. All right. The compare, typically what you'd use that for is if we had a form that, let's say, asked for first name, last name, email, then let's say either it said redisplay email or re-enter email, or had a password and a confirmed password, that's when you'd use the compare. All right. Finally, there's the display name equal N. We have looked a little bit at display, But just so you know, the way that that's going to be used, and we'll look at it in just a bit, that if I go back here and I create this form, this is not a good example, but let's say that we had in here, let's say that this was called movie name and movie rating. All right. So I put the two, capital MOVIE, capital NAME, and the same thing with rating. All right. That if I was going to use that in here, then in a form for a label, and I did use the label and I didn't create it myself, all right, I could use the ASP4 and it would come up as movie name and movie rating with no space. But when you come in here and you use the display, you can say, hey, I know that you're in the database a certain way, but I want you to display it to me this way. All right. Another example of that might be in the database, you very well might have first name and last name. You probably wouldn't have a field in your database called full name because you just create that by concatenating the two of them together with a space in between. But if I wanted to, maybe I only want to display this as full name. So there's a lot of ways this can conceivably be used. All right. Okay. So in here, really not a whole heck of a lot that's new. You know that either you put in that using system.componentModel.data annotations, or once you start adding this stuff, it'll get put in with you. You'll notice in the example they're giving right here, you can see movies required, and the maximum length is 30 characters. You can see that rating has a range. Also, you'll notice that in none of these three cases, all right, is there an error message that's shown? So whatever message comes up, if there is one, will be the standard kind of terse system error message. All right, and they're showing it right here. So you'll notice they're using what, Eternal Sunshine? I think that's of the Spotless Mind or something like that. And that's more than 30 characters. So you can see their message. And they gave it an illegal rating as well. All right. So as it says here, these are your default validation messages where they've got name in there in the brackets. That is the field name. That is the name as it exists in the database. All right. So again, you can use that display even in your error messages to try to make things a little bit more readable. All right. Now, for you and I, it's no biggie to say first name and draw it all together. Probably for 99% of the people who look at it, if not more, it's not going to be a problem. But if you're one of those people who's very particular and you want to make it as simplistic as possible because you're creating an application for one or more end users, the easier that you can make it for them to not screw up, the better off you'll all be. All right. So again, here's, you know this already. This isn't new. And you'll notice the only one that is new, I guess, in here is the string length can have an error message if you indeed want to put one in there. And as I've said before, I think at least it's a good practice to make your messages similar. We could have even said for both of these, we could have said, please enter a name of 1 to 30 characters. And you could have said the same thing here. All right. All right. So now they're coming in, and notice now they're working with a different class. So this would be a customer type of thing. All right. So what's new in here? Well, not that there's nothing new, but notice all the stuff they're adding to each one of the fields. All right. So you'll notice name required, nothing new there. Regular expression. And what does that say? Okay, my guess is rather than a name, this might be a username. The reason that I say that is they are allowing numbers when you look at the regular expression. All right. And I have never heard of a situation where somebody has numbers in their regular name. I'm not saying it's impossible. All right. But typically you wouldn't find it that way. Hopefully you remember some of the characters in here. The caret means starts with, the $ means ends with. Inside of the brackets here are your allowable values. So you can have A through Z lowercase, A through Z uppercase, 0 through 9. All right. The hyphen is a delimiter in there. It's not an allowable character. And if you had put a space in there, so if you said A through Z space, A through Z space, that would have allowed spaces as well, which you typically wouldn't want to have happen. So you usually run it together like this. All right. And again, regular expressions can also then have their own error messages. All right. Now, typically, the one to work with that you work with that's kind of the hardest usually is going to be or are going to be date time fields. You can, if you look in there, there's a type of, which basically says you have to put this in as a date. The reason the type of can be important is, you want to put it in there, and this says you can either put a leading zero if necessary or not. The same thing here. All right, so it's a good idea to put that in. And again, with the error message, the more specific you can be, the better. What I do not like about this example, all right, is they are going to a date that's ridiculous. All right. Plus, when you look at it for date of birth, all right, it's between 1900 and this. Well, cares? Well, the only reason that I care is you could even set this to something like date.now. So that in other words, that it couldn't be any more than the current date, something like that. All right. And there's other ways that you could do that as well. Okay. Then we've got, again, for the password, as it says, this is the password, up to 25 characters. Again, probably wouldn't be a bad idea up here to say how many characters minimum and maximum. But with the compare, you're letting it know what field you're going to be comparing with. So compare this with this field right here. All right. And again, if you put anything in here, it has to be a match. And when you do the confirm, not only does it have to be a match, in letters, etc., but caseness will be the same thing. So again, if you were setting something up where the user had to put in a certain number, maybe one or more lowercase, uppercase, special characters, numbers, etc., you could do that. So technically or typically, the more specific you can be in your required message, all right, the better off you're going to be. Okay. Like I said before, typically what you want to do is you want to make it as hard as possible for someone to screw up. Because you know what? No matter how simple you make it, there's a pretty good chance that someone's going to screw up anyway. It's human nature. People have a tendency to fill things out too fast without reading them. All right. I may have even told you this the other day. I think it was the morning class, but it might have been you guys I was talking with. And that is back when I was a junior in high school, I was taking geometry. The first day of class, he gave us a test. I was the only one who didn't read through all the test first. There were 20 questions on it, 20 things. Number 20 said, forget everything we said earlier, put down your pencil and smile. And of course, I was the only one who did all 19. I got done, people were laughing, but it did give me a good lesson. And that is when you get something like this, read through the whole thing to make sure you got an understanding of what it is you're supposed to be doing. All right. So as it says, so really in here, I don't know what, hopefully all that stuff that's in here is, it's not new. And you'll notice in here We've got 4 inputs, so we don't even have any labels. All right, when you take a look in here. All right. But it's in a div, so it's probably be where we would print it. We would be where we'd be printing the stuff out. But still, we don't. All right, here, as it says, it's an action method that receives a customer object from the view. Now, what you're going to see as we go on in here, it won't be maybe this week, or it might be, I don't know. But sometimes you want to present something and there's really no action involved in it. And quite often what you're going to see is, rather than an I action result, you might have, as an example, a view result, which basically means there's no action that's taking place. I'm just presenting you with some information. All right. But again, the stuff that's in here is not new. You saw an example that was similar to this earlier. All right. Now, as it says, here's an example for that customer when you leave the stuff out. And you can take a look. You'll notice, all right, where the name, where it says may not contain special characters, at the end, what? There is an exclamation point. The date of birth is before 1900. We've got a password that probably is legal. We've got a confirm password that's left off. All right. Again, this can be a really, really, really important slide, form, whatever you want to call it, for your end users if you are expecting them to type in information. And you might think, well, they're never going to have to type in information. What if you've got some kind of a search mechanism where they have to type something in if they're looking for something? All right. Again, the more descriptive you can be, the harder it will be for them to screw up what you're shooting for. Okay. So here it's got the input tag bound, as it says, to the name property. All right. So if you look in here, what do we have? Well, these are data vals. All right. And I don't know if we ever got into this in the AWD1000 class, probably not. And I don't know if you got into it in the AWD1100, I'm sorry, 1111 class last summer, if you took that class. But if I come in and put in this data val, and we look in here, well, that wasn't what I was expecting. So let's try JavaScript, data script, data val. All right. Let's see, get the value of data val after locating an element. Okay. In this example, I have a long list of list items, each of which has a data val attribute. Okay, fine. All right. The thing is, when you put in data val, it's kind of like when we were doing things like with a drop-down list, and we'd have a value you'd be showing, and then you'd have a value you'd be storing. It's kind of the same thing. It's not hidden per se, but you can associate data vals with just about anything you're putting, for example, into a form. All right, so the author says here, they say, how do you get the data val out? All right, and you'll do it like this. Now, art, it's just different. All right, but they show you some examples there of using it. All right, there's a little bit more, I believe, in the book than what I just mentioned. Now, as it says here, when you work with validation summaries, there's some stuff in here we have not looked at before. All right. So what is it saying? It's saying basically, in this case, validation summary valid. If everything is valid, You don't want to show anything. And if it's not, you basically want to show what's invalid. All right. So what's going to happen is you can go in and check this stuff programmatically to see if your validation summary worked or if it did not work, as an example. All right. And then they show some other stuff in here. I'm not going to go over it other than to say this. You may remember from the days of AWD like 11 or 1000, the web development technologies class, where we did things like create forms. I know you're doing the same thing in here. But what you could do is if you've got forms that are invalid or have fields that are invalid, that's what they're doing here. They're saying take any field that's invalid and put the equivalent of a text danger 2-pixel border around them and make the color of the background of the field itself antique white. Why? So that it'll stand out. All right. If it's valid, don't display anything. And if you have errors, display them in an unordered list. So there's an example of the kind of thing it would look like. All they're saying here is there anything new here? Yes. There's a new way of looking at something that you already knew. And that's what they're saying. Again, it depends on how much control you want to take when it comes to putting in error message. All right. And as mentioned previously, the key thing to this is, yeah, it's pretty doggone important that you put things in here and that you make it easy for people to understand, because again, you don't want to ever take the chance of garbage data getting into the system. All right. And there's all sorts of things. One thing I didn't even mention to you before, and that is, you know, what if you've got a company that's got a long name and one person puts it in one way that maybe they capitalize everything, and another person puts it in where they don't? You might want to change it, use something with regular expressions or something else, the equivalent of like a text transform, let's say, where you make everything uppercase or everything lowercase. Consistency cannot be overrated. All right. You want to make sure that the data in the database follows a consistent type of format. All right. All right. Now it says here properties of the model state dictionary class. You might say, oh, wait a minute, we already know these. No, you don't. Now, for whatever reason, all the stuff that we have been working with so far, all right, the stuff that we've been doing so far, all of this stuff, all right, as it says, common data attributes for validation. I thought there was a name in here. I'm trying to remember the name. Let's see. Yeah, we've used attributes for data validation. Yeah. Model state, you would think, I would think, that when you're talking about things with model state, all right, you'd be talking about things that are in the model. That's, I mean, to me at least, that sounds like it would make sense. Model state would be stuff that's in the model. This is not stuff that's in the model. This is stuff that typically is going to be in your controller. So the model state dictionary class usually will fall on code that's going to be in your controller. All right. Not always, but at least quite often. And with much of it, it will be things that work with key value pairs. That's why, as you can see on the bottom here, you've got a keys and you've got a values. Some of the other stuff, I mean, count, possibly you could do a field count, and then you could do an error count. All right. It would be important that the error count would be 0, of course. All right. We've already looked at the is valid. That's really the only one that's in here that we've looked at. All right. Some of the methods, as it says, add model error, and get validation state. And again, the key takeaway from here is we're not talking about things that are in the model, even though it has model state in the name. So here are some examples. All right. And if you look at the if statements that are in there, what they're doing very similar to validation that we have been doing it, but they're doing it programmatically. If I could make sort of an analogy, and you've heard this before, all semester in here, we've been using database first. In other words, we have been creating our database. All right. After we create our database, we run a migration on it. If the migration is successful, it gives us an up method and a down method. The down method allows us to remove the migration. The up method basically writes all of our code that we put into our models and writes all the code, even more importantly, that we put in our context file. And it writes that and it puts the field information in and the record information in. It puts it in as C# code. All right. So what I'm saying here, as far as trying to draw an analogy, probably not a great one, but we've been doing this stuff all semester, but we have not been doing it in code. We have been doing it by decorating our models. So this is another way that it can be done. All right. Now, would you ever have to use this? It would depend on the granularity, so to speak, onto which you were going to be going in and validating this stuff. I would say chances are pretty good you would very rarely, if ever, have to use this, especially if you were good at things like regular expression handling. But you never know. All right, that's the bottom line. All right. Now, as far as these tag helpers, well, you've looked at ASP validation summary. We've looked at this before. The ASP validation for, we've looked at that before. All right. And when you look at this, it says, what do you want to validate? This is pretty important. All means virtually everything. It means all of your code. Model means you're validating against what's in the model, but only that. And none would turn off any validation. So again, when you look here, this is model level. So again, we're writing code to do this. So rather than using like a validation summary or a span where we do individual fields, we're doing it in C# code. Now, the question there is, or might come to mind is, okay, fine. You said that later we're going to be working on this project and you're going to make us do some stuff. Are you going to make us do this? Probably not. What we will learn about later in this chapter is how to write your own custom validation. All right. That I probably will try to have you do something with that. Don't worry about it. We're going to look at it a little bit later. All right. So here is using the model only. All right. And here is where they use that span to come in. And for example, here in the net, okay, so this is doing an individual field. All right. So as it says, there are errors on the form. So where did it get that from? There are errors on the form. And what are they? Please enter a name, please enter a date of birth. All right. That's going to basically come from what's in here. All right. The next thing that's discussed in here, we'll go over this and then we're going to take a break. And that is, as it says, the jQuery libraries that are downloaded by default with the MVC template. This is a little bit confusing. Now, I will tell you this, and this is not me. I'm not putting myself on a pedestal. I'm not ripping on Doug Gegelman. I'm not ripping on um, Evan Gudmested. But one of the things I do in the AWD 1000 class is I do go over jQuery. According to what Doug and Evan have told me, they basically skip jQuery. Now, I only give it about a week, but I like to go over it mainly because it is JavaScript and it's an example of a JavaScript library. So you can see right here that by default, when you create a package, or I'm sorry, when you create an application, an MVC app, that under your www root, you'll notice what's here. All right. Not the CSS. Okay. Not the images, not the JavaScript, but under here, under lib. So these are going to be, for example, right here, that'll be your bootstrap.min.js, your bootstrap.min.css, etc. This will be jQuery. This will be jQuery validation, and this will be jQuery validation unobtrusive. When you end up putting those files in as script tags, all right, as script tags, okay, they can go at the end and quite often do, but the order matters. They are going from most general there with jQuery to most specific with jQuery validation unobtrusive. So the system will expect that they will be put in that order because it's possible otherwise one could overwrite the other one. All right. So when you work on this, again, when you are talking about this, anything under W root, anything is client side. So that is client side JavaScript, client side Bootstrap, all right, etc. And I don't know if you remember this, but one of the things we did early in the semester is we created a project with an empty template from scratch, and we added things to it. One thing that we did not use when we did that and added all this stuff is we did not use NuGet. NuGet is a package manager, but it is a package manager for adding server-side software, all right? Not for adding client-side software. I believe that NuGet even has a Bootstrap in there, but you wouldn't want to use that because that's server-side Bootstrap, not client-side like this is. All right. So again, they show it in here, and again, they've got it here in the head. It can be put there. Sometimes people put it on the bottom. You see it all over the place. Let's just put it that way. But again, notice the order. jQuery first, then jQuery validate min JS, then jQuery validate unobtrusive min JS. You want to keep it in that order. All right. They give you some caveats here for client-side validation. As it says, it only works with property level. That's the word I was looking for. Property level validation is validation you do in the model. I want to say that again. Property level validation is validation you do in the model. Because what are those things in the model? Anything that has get set after it is a property. All right. So as it says, client side only there. Well, what does that mean? That means you don't do client side validation, for example, in a controller. The controller is working directly with the server. Now, our machine is both our client and our server, but it's, not at all beyond the realm of possibility that if you're working for a company and you are an ASP.NET programmer, all right, that it wouldn't be, you'd be using a different machine. You'd have a different server that you'd be pinging to or going against. Number two, any server-side validation does not run until all client-side validation passes. This can lead to a two-step process that may annoy some users. Most people would tell you, tough luck. All right. And you probably have heard this from me or from Evan or from someone else. But typically, what happens is, as an example, if you have a form, you typically provide client-side validation to the form. I'm not saying in ASP.NET, I'm saying generally. You try to provide some client-side validation. The reason that you do that is if you send it off to a server, not your machine, but a server to a different machine, and it fails because, for example, you left a required field off. Now it's got to make a round trip. It's got to go from the client to the server and back to the client again for you to fix it. That's a waste of server time and resources. So typically, and we should have really been talking about this from the days of JavaScript. Now, the problem with that is that some users disable JavaScript. It happens. They do it on purpose, accidentally. It doesn't matter. But ideally, you put in client-side validation. Once it passes, then it goes over to the server. And quite often, the server will run similar, if not virtually identical, validations on the data. And the reason it does that is that it is possible for people to sometimes spoof on the client side, where they can make it look like something is valid when indeed it is not valid. All right. Finally, as it says right here, not all data validation or data annotations rather work properly on the client. It says in the example below, for instance, using a range annotation for a date of birth doesn't always work the way you think it would work. All right. All right. This is a good place to stop here and for us to take a break. It is 101. Let's come back at 115 and we're going to pick it up right here because this is writing your own custom attributes. So I'll see you back here at 115 and I'll be back in a few minutes. All right, it is 1:15, so I'm going to continue on then. About halfway through with these. Now, the next section, as you can see here, classes used to create a custom attribute. So the idea is you look through the list of possible attributes to decorate in your model, and you come up with something and you go, it's not really in there. Okay. So you can make your own. This would be, I mean, in a condition where, for example, you couldn't find a match in either using a range or doing some regular expression handling, etc. All right. Now, I'm not saying that this would have to be used often. This is something I'm thinking of having you add to the project that we do. And as you can see, classes used here, validation attribute, validation context, validation result. So those are existing classes. All right. Some of the things you can use is valid, etc. And you can see some of the stuff that's in here. So they show an example here. Now, as mentioned previously, sometimes working with dates can be a little problematic. So here they're checking to see if a date passed. Now you might think, well, that isn't really that hard of a thing. Well, again, notice the check isn't hard. So if the date is less than today's date, all right. But if you wanted something that possibly that you could check at any time, all right. Or as an example, if you were making a check like this, maybe you wanted to check what if somebody did this as an example, all right. What if someone said, um, they complain because let's say they bought something from you. You're a company. It doesn't matter what you sell. But let's say they bought something from you and you sent them out a bill and they wrote back and they said, hey, wait a minute. During the time that I bought this, it was supposed to be 20% off. I didn't get my 20% off. So as an example, you could check the date that they made the date that they made their request or their order from, and you could check that if you had a list of dates when the product was on sale. All right. And, again, as it says, you could return success or you could come back with some kind of an error message here. You'll notice too here, they've got string message equal base dot error message, question mark, question mark. This must be a valid, etc. Basically, what this is saying in here is this is kind of like the question mark colon operator. All right. And basically, though, what it's saying is, hey, if it finds an error problem, display this. Otherwise, don't display anything. You're going to start to see using the question mark and the double question mark at certain times why that can be important. All right. So they give an example of how you could use this then. All right. Now, you may or may not notice it, but when you look at it, this is then what you put in the model. You don't have anything called past date. There is no built-in validation, all right, when you're working in the model itself, all right, that allows you to do that. So you added your own, all right. And again, usually at least, it's a fairly special circumstance where you'd have to do that, all right. All right, a custom attribute that accepts values. All right. And you'll notice it's a two-parter on here. But again, it's, as you can see, years from now, and it's bringing in some kind of a year. And then it is calling that is past thing, or to see, I'm sorry, they are creating a new variable called in here, field, whatever you want to call it, called is past. And they're defaulting it to false, thinking that no, whatever you put in there will be okay. But then they're checking it in here to see whether it's valid or whether it's invalid. Now, I mean, this can get pretty heavy. The reason that this is important is, if as an example, let's say you get a job as a database programmer or a job as an ASP.NET programmer and you're working on a database application. To sit there and say, hey, boss, I can't do this kind of validation. And she or he says, why? And you say, it's not one of the built-in validations. That's not going to cut it. I mean, they're probably even already going to be thinking, well, then make your own up. And this is how you do that. All right. Okay. There's a date of birth property, as it says, that requires that a past date is no more than 100 years ago. That isn't even right anymore today. I mean, I would probably change that myself. And you hear about people in other countries living to be about 125. And my wife watches the Today Show, and she always will tell me how they will show people who are celebrating their 105th, 106th, 110th birthday. So that could be adjusted accordingly. All right. A custom attribute that checks more than one property in a class. Okay. So there are a lot of possibilities that are in here. So what it's checking in this example, notice the if statement. That's saying if the phone number and the email address are empty. All right. So you could come back. What it reminds me of when I read this, it's kind of like when you log in and maybe you put in a right username but a wrong password. And maybe you've heard about this before, maybe you haven't, but you should never get back a message from the system that says something like password invalid, because your login then might be okay. And if you were trying to break in as somebody, you should always get a generic message back that says something like username and or password invalid. And that's kind of what they're saying here. All right. So enter phone number or email. Now this could be, depending on how this is written. All right. Maybe they're asking for one or the other, and they're checking here for an absence of both. All right. And that's kind of what it looks like, with a double question mark here. All right. So again, they're going to come through here and they're going to show how to build this. All right. I was doing a lot of reading while you guys were taking your test over the weekend. And I mean, there are a lot, I'm sure you already know this. There's a lot of really good sites out there where you can get information. The learn.microsoft is a good site. I wouldn't say it's an excellent site, just because sometimes in there they're very verbose, or they're the other way. They give an explanation that's just not a good explanation. But there's a lot of good sites out there. And over the weekend, just to show you very quickly, because I don't want to waste my time or yours here. But where was it? I found this site, jin.com, and it's a blog. And there's a good article here on tag helpers. But the main reason that I'm talking about this site is what we're going to look at, not today, not tomorrow, but soon, will be authorization and authentication. And they tell you how, in one of their blogs here, how you can add authorization and authentication into an existing ASP.NET application. I thought some of the stuff in there, like I said, was just really good. Wrong one. All right. So as it says, they are showing you some examples in here. All right. So here they're combining everything into this custom validation class. So it's doing more than one type of validation. It's making sure that your date of birth is not in the future, and it's making sure that you've got entered in an email address and a phone number. So the takeaway on this is I'm not going to ask you to do anything I'm not going to do. All right. But after we create this project and we get it done, up, working, etc., then I am going to ask you to make some changes, additions, etc. to it. This is one of the things I'm looking at. So I'd make sure I could do it first, then we talk about it. All right. So again, this is that example of that past due, and they're using it with date of birth. We already talked about that. All right. Now notice here, jQuery.validator.add method. All right. So they're bringing it in and saying, hey, you could use this here on the client side. That would actually make a lot of sense because as we talked about earlier, it's better, it's better to validate on the client side and get as much of that validation up and running and working before you send something to the server. And again, I can't say this too many times. With what we're doing in this class, we are using the same machine as both our client and our server. But in the quote real world unquote, you're going to be hooking up to a real server someplace. All right. And again, they just run through that example. Okay. I'm not going to say any more about it. Then they show what it would look like when you use it. All right. Okay. Then you got a customer class in here. It's pretty much the same stuff. Notice here, minimum age. All right. Must be at least 13 years old. I love those things that, you when you get out and you're on an app and it says, you must be 13 years or older to use this app. You must be 18 years or older to view this content, etc. Where they can put that filter in there, but they have really no way of checking to make sure that indeed that's the way it is. I remember back in the day, when I was 18, all right, and when I grew up in Milwaukee, and 18 was the legal age, all right, but all the time they would say to you, how old are you? And I'd say, I'm 18. And right away, they'd come back with, what year were you born? All right. Because if I wasn't really 18, I gave them the wrong year, of course, they could refuse to serve me or do whatever. All right. So again, there's just a lot of this in here. Here it is with, again, JavaScript. Right? So I know I'm buzzing through this because it's just about everything that's in here. I guess that is it. So let's take a very quick look, and I mean that, and actually not in the next chapter, but I want to actually look in the book now and make sure we didn't miss anything. Then we'll go in and start looking at that at program 11.1. So you should have a good idea by now, as it says up here, how data validation does work in MVC. All right, as it says, for controlling the user experience. We talked about what we've been doing virtually all semester has been property level validation. But we mentioned that you could add typically to your controller model level validation also. And again, the majority of the work we've been doing this semester, if not close to 100% of it, has been server side validation. But as mentioned, you can't underestimate or underscore the importance of validating on the client side. All right. Then they end it, and that's the one we just looked at. So maybe we'll look at that, I don't know, in a little bit more depth and breadth of coverage. So again, nothing really new here. As it says, when MVC can't cast, it adds its own error message. We mentioned that before. The stuff that's in here now, hopefully you don't have any questions on them. That's, again, we've used several of these this semester, although not everything that's in there. So we went over this example that was right here. And again, I'm just of the mindset that you look, all right, and you look in here and it does make sense to you. Again, this is property level validation. There's the property with the get set. There it is, there it is, there it is, etc. So it's not model level, it's property level. All right. Formatting validation messages with CSS. Again, this is my take on what, on what they're talking about in here. Is it important, for example, that you're able to go in here and I wanted to show you that. I don't know where it is now, but where they show, for example, where they color coded messages, error messages. It's a nicety. All right. Is it something you're going to need? Well, if you go to a company and they ask, there it is, for this, yes, then it's something you need. All right. But it's a nice thing to provide. It's not typically a whole heck of a lot of work. All right. But at the same time, to me, it's more important that you understand the fundamental concepts that you're learning here and what's behind them, as opposed to working with aesthetic types of things. All right. So again, that's my take on it for whatever that is or is not worth. All right. So again, we've talked about all these. We looked at a very simple example like the one that's shown right there that's going to lead to something like this. I mentioned that in my opinion, you should have a standard way that you write error messages. I know, as an example, when I started programming professionally, one of the things that we were very much not told, but advised to do was when we wrote code to come up with our own standard, but really stick to it. And what I'm telling you is even things like where you put curly braces and things like that. The reason for that, is it was kind of your brand, all right? And not everybody would do things the same way. And to just tell you, I'll make it very quick. But what happened to me once was I modified some code, all right? And after I modified some code, there was, again, this was many years ago, okay? But a person in England who was working on what was called a telephone switching system, like I was working on, they modified their version of it. Well, this person screwed up. They didn't put in what I put in. Their stuff was different. And they ended up knocking the system out for a while. They went and blamed me. I'm not making any of this up. I got a call in from my boss asking me why I was working around with their code, etc. And I'm like, I don't even know where their code is. But the person was adamant, no, he did it. So I went back and we looked at the code and it was coded very differently syntactically, the way it was set up than the way I do things. And my boss knew that too. And they found the culprit out eventually who did it. It was the person who abused me. They screwed it up. But I'm just saying that there can be ramifications with stuff like that. You should have a standard way you write this stuff. All right. And it should be understandable to anyone and everyone. All right. We already mentioned that with CSS and getting that in there. So you change the colors, etc. So no big thing in there. All right. And we also talked again about this is model state. So this is on the server side also, but it's typically things that you would check like in a controller. All right. So this is rather than putting in property level validation, you're talking about putting in model level validation. All right. And that's kind of what they're saying in here too. By now, you should be cool with ASP validation summary, and you should be cool with ASP validation 4. All right. Be familiar and hopefully comfortable with either validating everything together or using spans and just validate what you have to validate. All right. And again, this is stuff that we have talked about already. All right. For client side validation, as we talked about, this is the 3 jQuery library files. We talked about the order that they have to be put in. All right. The caveats, we talked about those. How to customize on the server end. Again, this is where we just started after the break, and that was creating your own custom validation. All right, that can either have nothing passed to it or values passed into it. All right. And finally, all right, as they're going to show in just a minute, is going to be that user or that registration example that's in here. All right. Notice how to add validation method to the jQuery validation library. You can not only can you add your own, but you can modify existing things that are in there. All right. There is some really, really good jQuery form validation stuff. You may have no interest in this, but I'm just going to quickly say jQuery form validator. One of the things that I have done in the past is use the jQuery validation plugin. All right. And this is like 11 or 12 minutes. What was it? 11 something? Nope, 13 minutes. I'm wrong. But they explain in here how you can do validation on the client side. It's really well done. I'm not going to say it's super simple, but it's simplistic in the way that it's done. And I think it's very well done. All right. What did I do? Did I close the other one? Yeah, I guess we are done with it. Yeah, so. All right. Notice what they say here, and I don't know if I talked about this or not, but it says, in addition to enabling custom attributes so the validation runs on the client, you can write code on the server that's called by the client without reloading. It's kind of like the use of Ajax, where you do like a partial page refresh. It's sort of that same kind of an idea. And because the next sentence is what's important. It says when you need to perform a task on the server, like accessing a file or a database. All right, so again, it's something that could end up becoming very important. And the rest of it is that registration app. And again, walk through it quickly. As it says, the rest of the chapter presents a registration page of a registration app. It uses a lot of the validation techniques. So the bottom line is, I would take a look at this, especially if I decide that I'm going to give you something that's going to have some additional custom attributes for validation. That said, I'm going to shut this down right now, and we're going to go through the example right now, or start on it right now, that is here. So let me go to your projects, and we're going to look at 11.1. All right, and that's build the quarterly sales app. So let me move this down. We're going to use their custom data and everything else that's in here. So let's start by taking a look at what's here. In this project, you'll validate the data a user enters in a data-driven app. All right, so there's a few things in here, such as, notice we'll be able to come in here and filter by employee. All right, and if you don't know, I don't know who Katherine Johnson is. She may be somebody important. Grace Hopper is one of the women or one of the people who was very big in like the 60s and 70s. and she was one of the people who helped, I believe, create COBOL. Then another one that's in here is Ada Lovelace, and with Ada Lovelace, she is she's known as the first programmer, not the first woman programmer, but the first programmer, back in, I don't even know what year it was, but in many years ago. All right. So, for example, these would be Grace's quarterly sales, but we're going to check certain things, such as if we put something in if we put in this line right here, that line, then we're not allowed to go back in. There's no deletion on this program that we're going to do. There's no editing. All right, there's add and there's read. So the C and the R from CRUD. But if I put this in, I'm not allowed to put in another sales amount for this person this year, this quarter. Had a 2019 that was missing Q2, we could put that in, that type of an idea. All right. So you can see it's pretty simple up here. We're going to have three options. Home, which would just show us a fairly simplistic home page. Then we'll be able to add sales and we'll be able to add employees. All right. Now for employees, if you look here, you notice that there's some stuff here. It says Catherine Johnson with that date already in the database. Can you put two people in the database that have the same name? The answer is yes, but they must have a different date of birth. So we couldn't have two John Smiths who were both born on the same day. In addition, a person cannot be their manager. Let's say that Catherine Johnson has no manager. Then it is legal for her in this case to, when we're setting up her manager, to not put anything in there, which would mean she'd have a manager ID of 0. That's okay. That just means that she does not have a manager. But as you can see, it's not considered legal or viable for a person to report to themselves. In addition, this is what I showed you before. So notice 1/2019. We've already got a 1/2019 in here. So if we try to put that in again, we should get an error message. All right, so we will add some custom validation. So if we look in here at our specification, it says when the app starts, it should display the quarterly sales data and provide a drop-down that allows you to filter by employee, what we saw first. Enter a new and a sales data. To keep things simple, and I already mentioned this to you, there's no edit and there's no delete capabilities. And then we've got different requirements in here. So let's look. Here are the requirements for a valid data for a new employee. All right, you'll notice it says first name, last name, date of birth, date of hire, and manager are required. So that's assuming you can't bring somebody in that doesn't have a manager assigned to them. All right. Next, date of birth and date of hire are valid dates that are in the past. We already talked a little bit about that. Second, the company was founded on January 1st, 1995. So the date of hire cannot be earlier than that. There was no company. Next, a new employee, we already saw this one, may not have the same first name, last date of birth as somebody who's already in the database. Finally, a new employee may not have a manager with the same first name, last name, and date of birth. That is, the employee and the manager may not be the same person. So those are our 5 requirements for an employee. Then we've got requirements for the data when you use, so those would be what goes in here for the employee, and the other ones will be for the sales. And you'll notice there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 1, 2, 3, 4. And when we look in here, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and there's a couple more than 5. All right. So as it says, quarter, year, amount, and employee are required. Okay. There's 4 quarters in a year. Each year is 1/4 of a year, each quarter rather. So they must be 1, 2, 3, or 4. Next, we're assuming the year has to be after the year 2000. So even though the company was founded here, we're saying we're not starting sales till after the year 2000. Second, you can't have a negative or a zero amount for sales, which should make sense. Finally, the new sales data, as it says, must not have the same quarter, year, and employee. We just saw that with Grace Hopper. All right, then going on. The web app should include the jQuery validation libraries, so validation happens on the client as a convenience for users. However, for security, all validation should take place on both client and server. To keep things simple, you can make your custom validation attributes only validate on the server. Thus, they will only fire after all client-side validation has passed. Finally, to make it possible to enter a new employee, you can edit the context file so that it provides some seed data. All right. And I'll give you the seed data when we get to that point. So that's it. All right. So let's start. And this is going to be a quarterly sales app. All right. So I'm going to make a folder. Let me get rid of this stuff. Still got junk open. So let me close that. Okay. All right. So I'm going to make a new folder here. And it will be called quarterly sales app. That's what they said it was. And I'm going to start up a new project. And I'll keep calling it quarterly sales app, but I'll make the name of the solution just quarterly sales. Okay. 7, we're still not validating. You can check this or uncheck it. It will not matter. And I know we've started these and we've worked on them in different ways, but what I am going to do to start in here as soon as this, okay, there we go, is I'm going to come in and right away I'm going to go to Tools, and I'm going to go to the NuGet Package Manager and to manage NuGet packages for solution. Now, again, I recommended last time, and I don't know if it matters or not, but we'll load 3 packages in here. So we'll start with Microsoft dot entity framework. I don't know how I'm spelling here. And we'll start by just bringing in Microsoft Entity Framework Core. I really don't think we need these. All right, but I don't think it hurts anything either. So Microsoft dot Entity Framework Core. And one of these that's in here is just Core. Design Core Tools. Oh, let's just say forget it. Let's bring in first. Yeah, there it is. Microsoft Entity Framework Core. So I'm bringing in that one. Check. You know the drill by now. Install. Accept. Then the next one I'm going to bring in are going to be the Microsoft dot Entity Framework Core dot Tools. And finally, I'm going to bring in the Microsoft dot Entity Framework Core dot SQL Server. All right. And install, I believe they're all in. You know this about me already. I'm very untrustworthy. So I close it and then open it up again just to double check and make sure under install. Now I've got the 3 packages. And I do. All right. So that's out of the way. Now let's go to our app settings.json file and make the changes in there we usually make. So question mark or a comma rather, our connection strings. Again, this will be quarterly sales app. So let's just call this sales context to keep it simple. I'm going to check real quick because I have no idea. It's been probably half a year since I made this. So we've got a quarterly sales. So I think I'm just going to get rid of that database. And I'll call mine quarterly sales as well. All right. So like I said, for the database name, we'll call it quarterly sales. The trusted connection has got to be true. And finally, our multiple active result sets is true as well. I really should just take that, make a copy of it, and then just modify it every time, but that's okay. So let's go back here and double check. I think everything looks like it's okay. So I'm going to do a file save all, and I'm going to close this. And I'm going to open up my my program.cs file. And there's actually going to be a couple different things in here that I want to check on. Okay, so we'll do that next. First one will be what we always do, and that is underneath here, we will add our other services. We call that sales context, I believe. All right. As a It might be the using statement. Nope. All right. Okay, let me just double check. So builder.services.addDB context, sales context, options.use SQL server, configuration.get connection string, and sales context. All right, as of right now, I believe that everything that's in there is okay. All right, we've got our use entity framework core. All right, we don't have any models yet, so I think that's why it's kind of complaining and choking right here. That's okay. All right, there's one more thing that we want to do in here, and that is I want you, if you would please, let's see, I just want to look at what's down here. All right. That we'll leave it the way it is for now. Huh? All right. I'm going to close this. I did a save all, and I'm going to close that as well. And as we typically do, let's move on to our models next. All right. Now, as we get going in this, it's going to end up being a little bit different. And if you say, I don't know what you mean, you will in just a couple minutes. But what we're going to do in here is under our models, we're going to add a new folder, and that new folder will be called validation. And we're going to put our custom validation in there. All right, hopefully what I just said made at least a little bit of sense. All right, so we're going to have in here an employee.cs file, a sales.cs file, a sales context.cs file, a sales list view model.cs file. So we're going to have those 4 things in here to start with. As of right now, again, we've got this error view model. We don't really care about that as of right now. So let's start and let's do our employee, because there's a lot of stuff that has to be done here. Sorry, not a controller. Let's add a class and we'll call that employee.cs. All right. And again, we don't have to put it in, but I will anyway. And that is, whoops, not there. I'm sorry. At the top, I'm going to put in my using system dot component model dot data annotations. Okay. All right. So we've got our public class employee. We will have a public int employee ID with a get set. As said before, if you'd rather take that and make that a capital I and a lowercase d, we can do that too. Either way is fine. All right. Now it's giving me an error here. It says there's something is expected. Well, I'm missing something in here. All right, I removed something. I don't know what. I think there was typically at least, there's also one there. And down here as well. I don't know how I removed that, but I must have. Nobody else to blame. All right, that looks a little bit better then. Okay, so that's the first thing. Next, each employee will have a first name, a last name, a date of birth, all right, a hire date, and a manager. Okay, so some of that we'll be able to put in. Actually, we'll put it all in now. But what I want to do after that, after we fill in that, is I want to make our validation folder and start writing in, because we are going to have a past date and a remote that we're going to put in for the date of birth, and we're going to have a greater than that we're going to put in for the date of hire. All right, so we'll add all that stuff in just a bit. All right. I think 50 is ridiculous. In fact, I think if we make this 25, we're just fine. I'll leave it at 50. That's fine. We're using a display here. So again, when we've got different things that we're working on, we want to be able to have it rather than display first name like this. Just move all that over, get that over there. Rather than it displaying like this, we'll have it display like this. All right. I'm going to put in here equal string.empty. I didn't have it in the original one that I put in here, but I'm going to put it in anyway, because that hopefully will just remove one of the one of the warnings that we'd get otherwise. You know that already. So next is the last name. Since it's virtually identical, I'm going to copy everything from here. All right, I'll get an error because we now have two first names. So make that last name. All right, there should be nothing in here where there's any kind of surprise to anybody, at least for not with what we've done so far. All right. Okay, now again, we've got date of birth, date of hire, and the who their manager is. Okay, and it's their manager ID is what it's going to be. Okay. And again, everything that's in here is required. You'll notice that it's immediately flagging that because we haven't written that yet. So that, again, it's not a problem. So again, what this is saying right here, if you remember, one of the things that we were told is that we couldn't have two employees with the same first name, the same last name, and the same birth date. So what it's saying in here in this check employee, when we're doing this, we're going to have to make sure that once we come in there and we add the information for the employee and we've put in his and as that name, first name, last name, and birth date as well, already in the database. So someday I'll learn to put my fingers on the right keys. We're not going to come in and give this a minimum value, because by coming in there and saying we could, it wouldn't hurt anything. But by coming in there and saying that, putting in the question mark there, that should handle everything. So the only thing that's in here right now that we have a problem with is this past date. All right, that's the only thing, at least that's the only thing the system is currently flagging. All right. Now there's going to be a lot of similarities between this and the last one, but I am going to rewrite it anyway. Just grab that one. Now we're going to put another one in here that we're going to create called greater than. Again, these past date, greater than, etc. Those are just names we're coming up with. All right, we could call it something else, but we're going to put in here 1/1/1995 with an error message equal to hire date cannot be earlier than date company was founded. Again, I know that's kind of hard to read all that. I'm throwing a lot of junk at you here, but you can put whatever you want to put in there. Okay. Again, I can make that smaller so you can see it, but then I don't want to make it too small. But if you want, put it in, you know, exactly what I'm saying. If you don't like my verbiage and you want to put in your own, either way is fine. All right, so there's that. And then the only thing left is the manager. Well, I shouldn't say that. The manager, a little bit more to go here. Use another one of these greater thans in here. We're going to have a greater than, we're going to have a remote and a display. All right. This one is much simpler. 0. Okay, it doesn't like this error message. I don't know why, but it doesn't like it. Okay, and again, greater than is something we're going to write in just a minute. right. And I'll leave that up there for just a minute. So again, and I'll come down to it, but as we take this from the top, every employee has an ID. That's our primary key. Every one of them must have a first name and a last name. Nothing really other. We could even add an error message in there if we wanted to. We could make it smaller or bigger if we wanted to. And we will display this in error messages and the like, hopefully as first with a space name, last with a space name. All right, then we've got the rest of it in here. So for date of birth, we're going to write a routine that's called past date. All right, we will write that shortly. How's that? Okay, and let's see. That remote thing, again, it's not considered legal to have two employees with the same first name, last name, and date of birth. So that's what we're going to be checking with the remote. Then we've got the hire date, and notice we've got another past date in there. And that is, as it says, you can't hire somebody or must be hired in the past. We've also got a different or a greater than in here that says that the date that we hired somebody, all right, cannot be earlier than the date the company was founded. All right. And then finally, we've got another greater than, and that is to select an employee manager. Okay. That's our check manager. We want to make sure that the current person, when we look at their first name, their last name, and their date of birth, when we get to entering their manager ID, it can't be the manager, I'm sorry, it cannot be where it comes back to the employee, the same one. So you can't be your own manager. All right. And I believe we talked about that before. All right. So that's the first one. Okay. And then next, let's do sales, and there'll be some of the same stuff in here. So we're going to end up with some of the same errors. We could have come in and typed in our validation first too. But as always, there's a lot of ways you can do this. So file, save all. For now, at least, I'm going to close this. I'm going to go over to my models, and I'm going to add another class. And that will be sales.cs. All right. Again, I won't even put in my using. I'll let the system put that in for me. This one is not as bad. So public int sales ID with a get set. All right. And for sales, they need a quarter, a year, an amount, and an employee to basically attach to them. All right. And again, you should be able to think about it. Well, if it's a quarter, it's going to be required. And again, we're going to need a range attribute in there to say that it must be between 1 and 4. All right. When we get to the year, one of the things we were told in there is not only that it's required, but the year must be greater than the year 2000. That was something put in the specs. For the amount, we'll have another greater than in there, that the amount must be greater than 0. And then finally, when we're making our sales check, we already talked a little bit about this, but what that is saying is we cannot put in for the same employee, the same quarter and the same year, because as we were told in our specs, that this is a create and read only. We cannot edit, we cannot delete. All right. Move this over a little bit here. right? So there is the one for the quarter. All right, so again, basically, we're bringing this in as a primary, or as a foreign key, I should say, and this is our navigation property. So far, we have put in employee and we put in sales. All right. So let's do our sales. We're going to put a list view model in here. So I'm going to do that next. And I want to take for granted that if you're behind or a little bit, or if I'm going too fast, that you're going to stop me. So I'm going to close this. And I'm going to come in here again into models. I'm going to add another class, and it will be sales list view model. Be nice and short. All right, there it is. 3 lines. All right, that's everything. Now, I had been asked in the past, um, and I have a really, really simple definition of what a view model is. All right. And this is what I came up with, and I don't know how good it is or is not. But if you remember back in the days of the C sharp class, little bit of work when we got in and talked a little bit about databases. And one of the things we talked about, again, not in a lot of depth, but in a little bit about databases was joining two tables together. All right. So when you wanted to join two tables together, you basically needed a field in common between the two. That's kind of what we're doing here. We want to be able to join or bring together information from our sales table and from our employees table. All right. And if we look at that, to my knowledge, both of those, both the sales table and the employees table, have employee ID in there. It's put in as a primary key in the employees table and as a foreign key in the sales table. So that is going to allow us to add or bring in information together between these two. Like I said, that might not be the greatest of definitions, but it's the one I'm going to give you. How's that? So again, so far we've come in and we've done an employee.cs file, then a sales.cs file. Then we did a sales list model.cs file, which means that the only thing that's left is going to be our sales context in here. Then we'll do our validation folder where we'll hopefully get rid of all these errors that we brought in. As you can see, there's quite a few in here. All right, so again, I'm going to do a file save all. There's no errors in here. I get a couple warnings. And again, we could have set this to null or something else. All right, and those two would go away. All right. So I'm going to add my context file then. And I'm going to type it in with you. So there's a bit of typing in here. All right. We'll add another class. This will be sales context.cs. All right. You already know this. Now we do need to bring in that using Microsoft.Entity Framework Core. And we need to do that. So we're able to come in here and say inherit from DB context and nothing new in there so far. We need to put in our constructor. All right, you've seen all this stuff already. Now I've got it all on, and you don't have to, but I like to put this on a different line. It really doesn't matter. All right. And we're going to have our DB sets. We've only got the two tables. So public DB set, oops, sales with our get set, and a public DB set with our employees get set. Now, I just want to mention to you that a lot of times too in here, you'll actually see this as equal null, and in here too as equal null. I've seen that before because people like to initialize everything. It doesn't hurt to do that. Technically, they should be null when you start anyway. All right. And besides that, leaving it off means that I get um, two less warnings than I'd have had otherwise. All right. So we're going to do our public override. Sorry, our protected override. Void, that's our on model creating, our model builder. Get rid of that. All right. I'm going to keep this a little smaller. I know it's a little harder to read, but I can put more on a line that way. So maybe make it a little bigger. There we go. All right. We'll put in 3 employees. And I will tell you that her real birth date is probably 200 to 300 years earlier than that. Jeez Louise, Jeff. She has no manager, so we're going to leave that as 0. All right, so that's the first one. Let's put in 2 more. And I think to try to keep this fairly simple, I'm just going to copy and paste it, but then we'll make the changes. Question or a comma there, rather. So that was our first employee. Our second will be number 2. That is Grace Hopper. And I forgot to say my new employee line here, so let me put that in. Well, when I originally did this was employee 3, but I don't know if it's going to matter. Let me put in 2. All right, I'm going to change this to Catherine Johnson. I don't think it's going to matter one way or the other, but I'm just trying to be, I know the other one that I did worked, so. That's the second one, and she does have a manager, number 1. And I'll put a question or a comma there as well. And we'll have 1 more employee, but I'll give you a second to hopefully catch up. Again, copy this down, put it right there, get rid of that comma, because this is our last employee. So it'll be number 3, and this is Grace Hopper. Doesn't like these. Let's see, model builder. As data, new employee. 1, first name's Ada, last name Lovelace, DB, time 12:10, date of hire, date time 5:1, manager ID is 0. That looks that out. Yep, somehow I lost. No, I didn't. It's right there. Okay, we'll just keep going. So we've got this as data. That's our employees. So we've got 3 of them. There is Ada Lovelace, right there. Second is Katherine Johnson, right there. And third is Grace Hopper. That should be a 3, not a 32. Ugh. All right. After we've done that, we should be able to end. Try to figure out why it's got that. Those should be commas. Set. All looks good. Second employee. First name Catherine, last name Johnson, DOB. Next, 1999. 1. Employee 3. Grace, last name Hopper. 1. Yeah, it's for some reason it's expecting it to end right here. You know, it's expecting that, and that isn't right. Should be a comma. I don't know what the problem is here. Oh, I know. I've got a, wait a minute, I've got a curly here. Looks like I'm missing a curly brace here someplace. No, I'm just going to go on. I don't know what the problem with that is. Yeah, go
Mr.
ahead.
Scott, I think you've got an extra curly on line 25. I don't have that that opening bracket between the
Thank you.
employees.
Thank you. Okay, very good. Thank you. All right, so let's put in the other one because those are our 3 employees, and we're going to have 4 sales in here. And again, I appreciate that. So let's come down here. This is going to be different. All right, so this is our sale. As data. All right, so this will be a new sale. And somehow I lost my ending there. All right, so let's put it in. Oh, that should be sale, not sales. All right. Why is it doing that? Did I make it sales over here? I did. I broke one of the golden rules here. You should never take a model file and pluralize it. And I did. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to bring it up. And I'm going to try to change the name, but rather than just changing it manually here, I'm going to come over to here, right mouse click, choose rename, make it sale, and include everything and hit enter. And that changed it. And that should have fixed a lot of those mistakes that were in there. There, that fixed it. All right. Sorry about that. So let's just take this from the top. There's our first sale. Okay, there's no errors that I can tell anymore, thanks to you, Grant, in this file. All right. So let's come in and what we're going to do is add that validation folder. So I'm going to do a file, save all. And again, the attempt right now will be for all of these errors that you see right now, which are all related to the greater than, etc., have all those go away. Greater than and past due, basically. All right. So I'm going to close this. I'm going to close this. All right. And under models, we're going to add a new folder. We don't have to put it in another folder, but what's going to happen is we get more and more complicated with our models. We're going to add more and more folders. So let's add a new folder here. And we'll just call it what it is, which is validation. And we're going to have 3 files in there. All right. And the first one that we'll put in will be the greater than one. Not real long, but we'll put that in anyway right now. So We're going to come in here and add a new class. Now, typically when you're making your own custom validation attributes, you do put attribute on the end of the name. It's not that it's mandatory. I don't think it is, but we're going to anyway. So we're going to call this greater than attribute.cs. There it is. All right. Now, when you work with making your own attributes, all right, they have to inherit from what's called validation attribute, like that. Okay. Now, that made this come in here. Okay, but again, we are creating our own custom validation here. All right. So what we're going to want to do with the greater than is we are going to have to end up coming in and doing some comparisons. All right, so we're actually going to have a few things in here. First, we're going to have a private type object because we don't know what it is we're comparing, and we'll just call it compare value. We won't initialize it or anything else. All right, then we're going to have our constructor, so public greater than attribute, and it'll have some object that comes in with some value. Again, we don't know what it is. We want to be able to compare different things. And we're going to say compare val, oops, the one up here, compare val equal val. I want to compare what we have with what we're bringing in. All right. All right. Then we're going to write a big routine here that's going to take up pretty much everything else we do. That's going to be called validation result is valid. All right, so I'm hoping that you've got all that so I can come in here and all right. And if you look in here, it's got object valley. Did I type something in wrong? Nope. Okay. All right. So this is valid, not is valley. Okay, and we'll pass into that an object. And a validation context. All right, we're getting the error right now because we're not returning anything and it's expecting a validation result to be returned. So I'm not worried at all about that one error that we have in here right now. There's three things we'll want to check. We want to check an integer, we want to check a double, and we want to check a date time. All right, and I believe the integer is for that manager because we have to make sure that it's greater than 0. The double is for the amount. And the date time were for the hire date and the date of birth. All right. So we're going to check all of them. The checks, once we go in, what we do is going to be almost identical, but the type of value that we're checking is going to differ every time. So we'll say if value is, oops, I don't know why I did that. If value is int, that should be a little v. Probably is why I'm getting the error. Yep. We're casting them both to make sure we're comparing apples to apples. Shouldn't really have to do this. Okay, so in English, what we're doing here is we're comparing two integer values, one that we're passing into the system and one that's in the database. We're casting both of them to type int just to be sure, again, even though, all right, this one we have to because it's coming in as an object. This one should already be okay, but really, I guess not, because in here it was also an object. So we're casting them both, and then we're comparing. All right, remember that, for example, if this is the int to check, this is the manager ID, and it has to be greater than 0. That's what we had mentioned in there. Okay, so if it is greater than 0, then we will have a validation success. And this is going to be for a new employee. All right, so that's the first one. Now, what we do after that is going to be almost the same, but for example, instead of calling it int to check, we'll call it double to check and cast it as a double. So we're going to change all these from ints to doubles. I'm just going to type it rather than copy. Now, this is interesting. My wife is out, and there's somebody at my door who's ringing it. So hopefully they'll realize I ain't going to answer. And then we're going to do the same kind of if that we just did. We will check for greater than in this case. All right, so that's the second one. And then we also have to do the date time, which again is going to be pretty much the same thing. Now, the only thing that we're accounting for here is an int or a double so far. We're going to do a date time also. That's the only thing we should have to worry about, but we'll put a final else on this that says if it's anything else, and it shouldn't be, but if it is, don't do anything. We'll just return success. We here turn success, or we could add more data types if we wanted to. So if we knew we were going to have a check for Boolean, etc., but we're not told to do any of that in here. All right, that's why I'm doing it the way I'm doing it here. So else if value is date time. Very similar. Notice how it's already filling in stuff for me. All right. Now, one thing about this, all right, I've got to take this compare value. Yes, I am taking it, or the right here, I am taking it and I am casting it to a date time, but I'm going to also do in here the following. Let me put it in, then we'll go over it. All right. Again, dates are their own little unique creature, and we're trying to make sure that we are comparing apples with apples. This is again going to be a greater than. All right, and finally, like I said at the bottom, we're just going to say else return success. And as I already mentioned, there's different ways we can handle this, but I'm just going to return validation result dot success. Now you'll notice it gave me in here possible null references. So we could go back in and I could be adding some question marks, but what you should notice is it has removed. So I'm looking at in here. So let's see. No, I still have some greater thans in here. So let's see. Doesn't like this is valid. I'm gonna, looks like that's the only error I have in here. All right, so I want to fix that. Protected override validation result is valid. Rest configurations. No, that is actually correct. We take it from the top here. Public class, greater than attribute, validation attribute, private object, compare value, public greater than attribute object val, compare val equal val, protected override, validation result is valid. Object value, validation context, CTX, that's all correct. I don't know what it doesn't like here. Doesn't know the value of doesn't match. Well, it's also giving me a thing saying not all paths return a value. This is return success. Here we're returning success. Here we're returning success. Otherwise, we're just telling it to return success. Trying to figure out here what it doesn't like. Oh, everything I'm looking at in here is actually correct. There's a little more we have to add, but I don't think that's what's giving us the error here. But we'll check in a minute. Oh, well, we could call it anything. I called it here. I actually called my date to check because it's a date, but that shouldn't matter at all. That shouldn't be giving me errors or not giving me errors. That's just naming. Yeah, did not change anything with that error that's up here. Ah, here it is. Here's part of it at least. This, we're going to compare this with a new date time. That's part of the problem. And then we parse that and put it into this. Okay, so again, we're comparing apples with apples. That's my mistake. If date to check equals date to compare greater than, return that. That's good. Else return. So this should be catching everything. After the end of this, so after the else, you need to put in a couple lines. String message equals base dot error message question mark question mark. All right, did that remove that error from here? Yes, it did. All right. So I have no errors that are showing in here now. I still got some greater than stuff in here, so we'll have to ferret that out in just a bit. But that is correct. So that is the first one. Then we need the past due, shorter than the one we just did. So we'll do that one next. Are you all caught up?
Yes, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. So file save all in here, and I'm going to close that. So again, under validation, I'm going to add a new class. And it will be past due attribute dot CS. Quite nice. Going on here? Forget I typed in any of that, please, because that has got to go in here. Boy, oh boy. Why it's doing that? But it's just validation context, and that should be just CTX. Could leave it with that name, but that's a terrible name. All right. Now remove this, and then we're good to go. It's going to look very similar, this part of it is, to what we just did. All right. We've got one more validation method to write, and that'll be validate itself. And I think we'll call it a period after that. So close that as well. And again, I don't have validate in here yet, which is the reason I think I'm still getting a bit of, quite a few of these errors. So hopefully they're going to start to disappear quickly. This isn't bad though. That means tomorrow when we pick this up, I think the first thing that we'll do is we will write the controllers, then we will write our layout file, then we will add our views. All right. And that really should be most of everything that we've got left, I believe. So come in here and write one more class. That will be validate.cs, just like that. Now this is going to be static, and it's going to be called both from the client side remote validation and from the server side. All right. Well, you'll see this when we get to the controller in just a bit. So it won't be public class validate, it'll be public static class validate. The reason that that's important, putting the word static in there, the reason that that becomes important is due to the fact that we will not have to instantiate a validate object. All right. If we didn't make it that, you'd have to new it or instantiate it. By saying static, have to, all right. It's over. It's down. It's fine. I'm just going to call that E, otherwise it's going to be very confusing. Now, you may or may not remember, this, but one of those checks we made before said that you can't have two employees with the same first name, last name, and date of birth. That's what this is validating right here. All right. Now, if it's null, what that means is we did not find a match. All right. So in other words, the first name, last name, and date of birth that we enter are not currently found in the database. That's what's going to happen if it's null. So there's nothing to return. There's no error. But otherwise, well, something's goofed up with my curly, so we'll fix it right now. So employee dot full name. All right. Okay, so that'll be like Jeff Scott, date of birth with the date of birth. Too short data string is already in the database. Don't think we need a paren there. There we go. All right, let me make it a little smaller so you can see all of it. There it is. We're not done, but we're done with that method. We've got to write a check manager and a check sales, and then we'll be done. All right, I'm looking and I see no errors right now, which is always a good sign. So, all right, so that's our check employee. And again, that will double check to make sure we don't have the same employee, same first name, last name, and date of birth in our database. All right, so after that one, we need a check manager. Well, we can call it whatever we want. I called it check employee manager match. Okay, so in fact that also, yeah, static, good. This is going to be static also. Very similar to the one we just wrote. Not copying though, I just tired of doing that. All right, so this check that's right here is checking to make sure that a person has not put him or herself in as their own manager. All right. So finally, we've got to check sales. And this is to make sure that if we've got a year, if we've got an employee and a year and a date and an amount already, or a year and an amount already in the database, since this is not an edit or a delete, that we don't allow that either. So that's the last one. This is not employee here. This is sales. So sorry about that. No, nothing else. Return. And that's it for that one. So again, I'll give you a second. That's got to be sale here. There you go. Still has a boatload of errors. And getting quite a few possible null references too. We can again fix those. Like I can come over here where it's varemp. I think if I put a question mark there, it'll remove what's there. Again, we can do that. I'm just going to leave it the way it is. All right, I'm going to do a file, save all, and I'm going to do a build solution. There's looks like there's still tons of errors in here. Actually, not tons anymore. It's down to this. All right. Okay. Some of those errors just left because this is now valid, but it doesn't like that configuration in there, and I have spelled it correctly. Did you say before, do we have to use builder in here someplace that I'm not using it? I know we needed it there.
Yes, it's
Is it here? Is it
it's
builder
it's
dot
right before configuration on that line.
right here?
Yes, it's builder.configuration.
All right, thank you. All right, and there still are some errors in here. All right, but these are all, are you missing a reference? So that shouldn't be hard to bring that in. All right, and it should be now, I believe we're going to be able to click here. Oh, I thought there'd be a using. We've already generated these. So let's double check. And don't think we have to call those attribute in here. Attribute. All right, I'll tell you what I'm going to do is I'm going to call, but I'm going to look at this. There's one. Okay, so that was that using. And that got rid of most of the errors, but not all of them. Doesn't like the past due. Past due. And past due attribute. All right, but I am going to take this one, this using quarterly right here. And I'm going to add that. I put it in my employee. And under models, I'm going to put it into sales also. Sale. All right, and that got rid of a lot of the errors. I'm down to here now, I'm down to 4 errors, and they're all the past due and past due attribute. All right. I'm going to add that using statement in here as well. No, we got it already. Oh, you know what it is? I call this. So if you got the same error, right mouse click on here, do another rename, change that to past date. Enter. All right, so all that's left now are 6 null reference things. And again, we can change those. I already showed you that. Right. Now what is it? Employee. And again, I could come in here and make this null. But that gives me a different thing, cannot revert to null. So I don't want to do that. I'm going to be okay with these. We'll look at these tomorrow. All right. Now, are you to the point where I am that you're down to just these?
Yes, I've just got warnings. No
Good.
errors though.
All right. So tomorrow we'll pick it up. And the first thing we'll do is we'll write the controller. All right. And there'll be more than one controller, as you'd probably guess. All right. And that is, there will be an employee controller, a home controller, a sale controller, and a validation controller. Now, none of them are real long. All right, but we'll do our controllers. And with most of these, they're only going to have one view file. Regular. So we made this done. And if we do boom, I'm just going to jump right into chapter 12. All right. So that hopefully either by Wednesday or Thursday, if we could get this done by Wednesday, that'd be great. Then you'd have Thursday and Friday as lab. Now, I think you're pretty much caught up, but I have people in the class who are quite a bit behind. So if I can give an extra lab day, that would be fine. All right, that's what I've got. Thank you for pointing out my multitude of errors, and I will talk to you tomorrow. Have a good rest of the day.
Talk to you tomorrow. You too.